Americans for Prosperity is committed to breaking barriers across the country, and Americans for Prosperity is growing across North Dakota. By calling on lawmakers to reduce taxes, spend less, improve health care, and provide second chances, we can empower all North Dakotans to rise. We're fighting for you. Join us today so we can make North Dakota the best state to live, work, and raise a family. Americans for Prosperity paid for this ad. It seems all we ever talk about now is coronavirus, right? COVID-19. It's hard to avoid. We'd all like to be talking about other things, but here we are. Recently, a part of the debate over how we're responding or how we're, I guess, dealing with the virus has shifted to the question of housing. It's a necessity. We all need shelter, right? We all need a place to live. People are losing their jobs. North Dakota's, I think in the last 12 days, if I'm quoting Governor Burgum right, the last 12 days, the number of people filing for unemployment in the state of North Dakota surpassed the number of filings we saw in 2019. I know at one point on any given day, I know a lot of people don't spend a lot of time looking at these numbers. I do. North Dakota averages, and obviously seasonal things, it's up and down, but a normal day in North Dakota, unemployment filings are around 80 for the whole state. And we are seeing thousands now a day. So I don't want to soft pedal that situation. It's bad out there. And that's having some downstream implications. If you don't have a job, if you don't have a paycheck coming in, if you're laid off, if you can't work, your ability to pay for things that you need, like food, like clothing, like housing, is going to be limited. Now, my guest now is Dane DeKrey. He is he works with the ACLU. And Dane, you've been on this. It feels like you've been on the podcast a lot. We've been talking a lot lately.
A reoccurring guest.
That's right. You're part of a coalition of groups that is calling for a moratorium or a freeze on foreclosures and evictions. Why don't you, in your own words, describe what exactly it is you'd like to see as policy?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Rob. I appreciate it. So I think that there's been a little bit of misunderstanding exactly what we are asking for, and partly I think that's a little bit due to our own messaging, and so I apologize for that. And I think also there's some other groups out there that are calling for a little bit different things than we are. So let me try to be exactly clear for what we called on yesterday from the governor. What we are essentially asking for is, until this emergency is over, and we don't know when that's going to be, and then for 90 days after that, we are asking that people can't be foreclosed on if they own their home. They can't be evicted if they're a renter. There's no late fees applied for not being able to pay in that time period. And there's no reporting to credit agencies for this failure to pay. And so the biggest thing is we're not asking for a cancellation of rent. And I think that's one of the things that we didn't get across exactly right yesterday. We're asking for a pause button. We're saying that, citing the numbers you just discussed, North Dakotans at these alarmingly high rates are not having money coming in, and so it's going to be very difficult for them to pay this rent during this time crisis. And so we're just asking for a pause button for the rent to sit and wait, and then 90 days after the emergency is done, then that rent will come due, and at that point we're hoping to be able to talk with landlords about some sort of a repayment plan. So landlords are going to get paid. We're just asking them to delay it a bit, understanding the crisis.
So I understand that, and I understand what you're coming from, and I am certainly sympathetic to people who are in a situation where they can't make their rent and they don't know what to do. I think the problem, though, and what seems to be, I think what the renters are asking, as a matter of fact, you know, one of the companies that in my company, my organization, Forum Communications, wrote a story that was very much focused on Craig properties in Fargo. So there's a letter to the editor today in the Fargo Forum from Jesse Craig who owns Craig Properties, and he's making some points saying, listen, we have bills to pay too. I mean, we're talking about renters who maybe can't make their mortgage payment or not renters, but homeowners maybe can't make their mortgage, but renters who can't make their rent payments. I mean, what if you're the owner of a property and you have a mortgage on that property and you can't make your mortgage payment on that property? What if you have employees at your rental company that you're trying to keep on the job, and if you lose a significant portion of your rental income because people are allowed to just pause it and you have no recourse in the courts or anything else, what are they supposed to do? Why is it the job of the rental companies to aid in the recovery from coronavirus?
There's no good answer to that, Rob. And I can ask the same question right back to you is, what are these folks supposed to do?
Yeah.
That's the point of this crisis. We don't really know. And the reason that we are asking for this right now is because we know that there's a tangible deadline on Wednesday where some people are not going to have that money. And depending on the rental company, and everyone is different, they could begin to try to do an eviction action, whether it could be heard in the court right away or if it just sits in abeyance until the courts reopen. We just feel like these people are on the front lines, and so we are focusing our attention on them first.
Everybody's on the front lines of this, though. Right. I mean, this is what really kind of bothers me about this call right now. And I realize your group is separate from the other groups, but I'm reading a press release from the North Dakota Democratic Party, and they're taking shots at Governor Burgum, saying that he himself is a landlord and he doesn't understand the plight of working people. I keep saying over and over again, the problem with coronavirus, it's not flipping fair to anybody. There's no group that's coming out of this ahead of any other group. Now, there may be some groups that are a little more prepared, some factions of our society that are maybe a little bit more prepared than others to go on, but it's not fair to anybody. And so I'm having a problem with saying, well, these people are on the front lines. We're all on the front lines.
I think that's fair, but I also think that, frankly, landlords probably are better off than the people they're renting to just by nature of having a property.
So they deserve to be hurt then? Like they deserve to be hurt? No. It's okay to hurt them for the sake of others?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is we have this Wednesday deadline for people who very much could face losing their home, and we think that we should be working downstream first, and then we should move upstream. Everybody is going to be helped out, or we expect or hope everyone to be helped out, but we just try to work from the most vulnerable up. And so the landlords, they deserve relief. And somebody else above them deserves relief. And ultimately, it's going to become a question for government. And I know that you've been talking about a special session or getting the federal government involved, but eventually, we're all going to pay for this together. That's how all of these crises are paid for. And so the only reason we're calling for this now is because the Wednesday deadline affects these people the most.
Yeah. Why do we need Governor Burgum to act? I mean, the state Supreme Court has already said, listen, we're not hearing these. I realize they left some wiggle room for district court judges, I think, to have some discretion in certain cases. But why do we need the governor to step in?
Well, the first part, you just hit the nail on the head. There is some ambiguity, but more importantly, there's not the same certainty that what we're asking for allows. So in the Supreme Court order, what it says is once the crisis is over, then things would go back to normal right away. And we don't know when that's going to be. You talk to different people. They have different opinions on when this is going to be over. And so the certainty that an executive order that says after the emergency plus 90 days, then people can know that's exactly when things are going to get back to normal. Whereas under the current Supreme Court order, it could happen this week. It could happen next week. And so, one of the biggest things I think people need in this situation, to the extent they can, is some sort of certainty. And that's why we think that this executive order should go.
What about a situation, because we're talking a lot about people not paying their rent. But if we're going to put a moratorium on evictions, people get evicted for a lot of reasons. And it's not always failure to pay, although that's a lot of it. Sometimes it's that people are smoking in their building and shouldn't be, or they're violating some other policy. Maybe they've got pets in there and they shouldn't have pets. Maybe they're doing damage to the building and they don't have damage? Or what about landlords who are they just supposed to sit on their hands and watch their tenants destroy their property or harm their property or violate policies and have no recourse to do anything about it?
No, absolutely not. In the language that we would like to see from the governor and what we've drafted out as a proposal, it has to be COVID-19 related. That's obviously, throwing the baby out with the bathwater there, Rob. We don't want this to become a situation where we have people do whatever they want. And I don't think North Dakotans, the vast majority, are going to do that anyway.
No, I want to make that clear. There's bad apples out there, though. I mean, we can't get around it. But I agree. Most people are good people who just want to live their lives and pay their bills and move on. I mean, I agree with you there. But I mean, there's also no. I used to serve eviction notices it was part of my job. It's what gave me the thick skin that I have today. But I used to be the guy who had to go and post the notice on the door, hand it to the people, and if they didn't respond to that, I had to go serve the summons and complaint on them and get that ball rolling. So I'm very familiar with why people get evicted a lot of the time, and a lot of times it is. I mean, there are problems. And I mean, when I read the current state Supreme Court order that we have, I mean, obviously they've given district court judges, I'm assuming judges, if it's a situation where, hey, someone's, there's water dripping out of the apartment, right? I mean, I would hope that sort of a case would be heard and the sheriffs would serve the papers and everything else in that sort of a case. Do you know?
I don't know. I'm sure that's what they leave open for good cause. The funny thing about the law is too much or too little detail gets you into a place you don't want to be. So I'm sure they left it that ambiguous so that if landlords truly thought these things were happening, they'd have a recourse. And then people in return, if they thought they were actually not doing it based on that, but for a different reason, they could fight it. So I understand why the Supreme Court probably put good cause in. But as far as our executive order, the same way that lots of this new unemployment insurance benefit is tethered to COVID-19, we'd anticipate and expect that our executive order would have the same tethering to avoid these sorts of things that you've brought up.
Do you feel like we can, and I say this, one of the problems, I mean, I've been calling for a special legislative session. We need to have one. Governor Burgum cannot, as a conservative, I mean, just philosophically, I don't want the executive branch to just have complete say in emergencies. We have multiple branches of government. In fact, before we go into any of that, let's talk about separations of powers for a moment. Is it appropriate for the Supreme Court to make policy like that? Because setting aside whether or not I want Governor Burgum to issue an executive order on a moratorium on evictions or foreclosures, I don't think the court should be making that sort of policy. Because what worries me is the Supreme Court makes that decision, and then later on, a rental company or what have you says, hey, we think this was wrong, we think this was illegal, we think we were harmed in some way, and they want to file a lawsuit over it. Who hears that lawsuit? The same courts that issued the policy, right?
Right.
I mean, I look at that looks like a problem to me.
That's why we're calling on the governor.
Yeah.
This is an area that the governor should be handling.
Yeah.
And whether or not you specifically disagree with some of those things, I do think that this is an executive branch question.
Right.
This is something that needs to be addressed by their office in the event that there is a challenge. And moreover, because this is what you sign up for when you become governor, is having to make these tough decisions. I've been saying to people, it's easy to be a governor in good times. And if you're lucky enough to have all good times, good for you. But true leadership comes in the bad times. And Governor Burgum has done a good job. I want to be the first one to say that. I think all of the people in our coalition think that. We just want him to do more here. He's provided lots of relief for lots of different groups understanding this crisis, and we just ask him to extend it to these folks.
Do you consider the North Dakota Democratic Party as part of your coalition? I mean, they've been kind of touting what you folks are doing.
They are not part of our part of our coalition. We've talked to them. I know that there's people in the Democratic Party who are also talking about this issue. But like I said on yesterday's press conference, the goal of this is to be nonpartisan because it's not just Democrats who are going to be thrown out or have issues this Wednesday. It's Republicans, Libertarians like you, Rob, and Democrats, all people of all political stripes have lost their job and are facing this. And so we've really tried to keep this nonpartisan, and we obviously are talking to anybody who's interested in the issue. But as you can tell from our press release and from our letter to the governor and our press conference, this is a nonpartisan effort.
Do you feel like I wish I would rather attack this problem from an ability to pay situation. And I say this, and again, as a conservative, it makes me kind of want to spit. But I would rather just cut people checks from the government or give them. I mean, one of my idea was, hey, we have billions of dollars in the legacy fund. I don't want to just give people money, but let's loan this money out to businesses. Let's loan this money out to individuals on super friendly repayment plans and attack this issue from that perspective, as opposed to just telling a business that they can't charge for their service, that someone's allowed to use their property and they're not. We're just going to waive all the contracts and leases and everybody else signed and just say you have to continue providing services and you're not going to get paid for them. Or at least you're not going to get paid in the moment. Well, I mean, you say that.
Well,
people who are already at risk, people who are already not paying their rent now, let's face it, are people who didn't exactly have a lot of reserves already. So what's going to be their ability to pay down the road?
Well, there's a couple things to unpack there. I think the first part is that, in this scenario, I think you can look at it as a doomsday scenario or the North Dakota way. And I think that even if this executive order goes in, the vast majority of people who can pay are still going to pay. That's the North Dakota way. So I still think, I'm confident that this is going to not be affecting as many people as landlords want us to believe. So if you can continue to pay, you obviously should pay during this crisis.
But you're rolling the dice.
Now,
I mean, I know you just said that landlords want us to believe, but aren't they right to be a little scared? I mean, if we're looking at some of these unemployment numbers that are coming in, are they not scared, thinking this could be a lot of people, this could be a significant, and also depending on where the landlord is. I mean, if you're a landlord in the oil patch right now, that's a different thing than maybe being a landlord in Fargo.
That's true. And again, this comes back to, it's always going to loop around to the beginning of our conversation, which is that there's no great answer for this, but the answers that we've heard so far leave the least well off in the immediate future. I mean, yesterday when Governor Burgum addressed our question, he said that he wants this to be paid for, or you want to wait to see until these $1,200 checks come in from the government. Those are 3 weeks away. We heard that from Senator Hoeven earlier in the press conference. A 3-week away solution doesn't solve a Wednesday problem. And at the end of the day, the people who are going to be most affected on Wednesday are these folks. I'm not saying landlords shouldn't be paid back. I'm not saying everybody doesn't deserve relief. This is a crisis that transcends politics. It transcends ideology. You even just talked about it. I've talked about it. It's an interesting time, but what we're trying to do is prevent people from being on the street, prevent people from contracting COVID-19, and giving them some certainty in this period of time that there's very little certainty. I don't know if there's a better answer than that. This is kind of a humanity question to us, and we're saying we're all in it together. We're not asking landlords to eat this money forever. We're asking them to put a pause button for these people. And if they need help, we're asking on the state to help them. Everybody deserves help up the chain until we can all get this help to push us through until we can get back to normal times.
I know that your group is not affiliated with some of the, I mean, there's a lot of people speaking out on this issue, and they're not all necessarily part of your coalition. But from the public's point of view, a lot of the people out there are making landlords out to be the enemy, right? I mean, even Fargo City Commissioner John Strand, was saying, well, these people, they get tax breaks and they get everything else, and I mean, there's an assumption and there's an effort afoot out there, I think, to really make the landlords into the bad people here, and I don't think that they are, and I don't think it's really fair to make it like this. This really, really looks divisive to me, and especially I look at the North Dakota Democrats press release as well. And that, again, I mean, they're taking a shot at the governor for being a landlord. It looks like there's a calculated effort in this to make landlords out to be the bad people. Do you think that's fair?
That's a big setup for a gotcha question, Rob. I don't think it's fair to paint anybody in broad brushes. I have seen examples of tone-deaf landlord letters. I've seen examples of landlords who have tried to help work with people. We don't speak for the North Dakota Democratic Party. I don't speak for City Commissioner John Strand or any other organization who's not in our coalition. What I can say is the patchwork that we've seen so far is leaving some people out, helping some people out, but in this time of crisis, we think that we should have a one unified approach, and the only way that's going to get done is by Governor Burgum putting an executive order out, clarifying what's going to happen so that people have an answer before tomorrow.
Well, I guess we're going to see what's happened. And again, there's no easy answers for any of this because I don't want to see people evicted. You know, if it was just the coronavirus that put them in this situation, I don't want to see people evicted. But I'm having a very hard time with telling any business or any industry that they just have to take it on the chin for a while. I don't think that's fair. But of course, this isn't fair to anybody, so it's hard to talk about fairness. We're not asking grocery stores to just give away food. You know, we're not asking hardware stores to just give away their products, you know, but we're asking landlords, at least for a time, to give away their product. I have a hard time. And also, there are leases in place here. There are contracts in place. People signed on a line. They obligated themselves. And if they weren't prepared for something terrible happening, and again, I understand who could prepare for this, but if they didn't have reserves, whose fault is that? And what obligation is there for the rest of us to I guess, fill in the gaps of their own responsibilities?
Well, there's two things I can respond. One, I don't know these contracts, but having gone to law school, in most contracts, there's something called a force majeure clause, which says if there's an event that nobody can anticipate and is an emergency event, you can have an ability to get out of a contract. So contracts aren't as bulletproof as it seems, and sometimes
okay, but if they get out of a contract, that also means they have to leave, right?
That would mean they have to leave. That's right. But again, I'm just saying when you're going to harp on the contractual obligations. But I think the more important point is other businesses are being told to shut down, bars and restaurants.
Sure.
So if we're going to say that, the point, again, and this is the hard thing for, you and I to agree with or understand, is that I don't think there's a right answer without a strong executive branch action, because there's going to be winners in the immediacy, losers in the immediacy, winners in the long term. You can frame it that way, or you can just frame it as we are trying to prevent damage from happening as best we can. And that's just where we've landed. We are trying to triage our advocacy efforts for people we think need it the most in the most immediate time, and then move past that. I think it's really important that we have no interest in trying to screw landlords. That's not what this is about. We are just trying to pump the brakes on this situation to avoid lots and lots of people getting in worse situations. And those landlords should get the help that they need from the next level, wherever that may be. The state of North Dakota, whether we want to do it in a legislative session, whether we want to tap into the legacy fund, whether we want to give them these low, no-interest loans from the Bank of North Dakota, we can help everybody. We don't have to pit one another against each other. And until this is over, we should all be doing our best to work together.
Well, that's why I asked. I know you called it a gotcha question earlier, and I wasn't trying to make it a gotcha question, but what you just said about not pitting people together, I agree with. I don't want to pit people together, but I think there's a lot of that going on in some of your allies in this move, and it might behoove you to condemn some of that if you want to get this done. Because I can tell you, if it's going to be a divide and conquer, if it's going to be renters versus landlords, I'm going to have a hard time signing up to support anything like that. Anything that's going to paint businesses who are just trying to conduct their business on the terms that their tenants agreed with and they're suddenly the bad guys because coronavirus came. That's not right. And I've realized that's not what you're trying to do, but that's happening out there, and it's not right.
I think there's been things that have been said on both sides that people are worried about their own situation, and as a result, maybe say some things that they don't necessarily mean. I think when people their backs are against the wall, that might happen. I can't, and I'm not going to speak for them. I just kind of continue to pivot back to this fundamental question. If this isn't the right answer, what's all our alternative before tomorrow? What are we supposed to tell these people when they start calling me on Wednesday and Thursday? What do we do? And I understand your question is the exact opposite to me. Why should it be the landlords who bear this burden? The question back is, why should it be the renters? And I understand the contractual things and all of that, but in this time,
because we always have that burden, right? I mean, we all have the burden to pay for our own way in the world. We all carry that burden every day. I'm carrying that burden. You're carrying that burden. Everybody carries that burden. You know, you're asking the landlords to carry an additional burden, which is providing the services of their businesses without getting paid
for a temporary amount of time.
Yeah.
And the reason they're not getting paid is because these folks have lost their job through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
It would be different if it was through their own fault. And that's, I think, the important difference. You're right. We all do carry these obligations. But if you've lost your job and your livelihood through no fault of your own, we don't think you should then also lose your house and everything else.
Well, Dane, I appreciate what you're trying to do. And I'm having a hard time, I guess, getting on board with it. And it's not clearly, given my support for some of these bailouts and stuff, it's not an ideological objection. I think now is a time when we could set aside some ideological objections, but I'm looking at this and it just strikes me as the wrong way. And sometimes I'm not sure. I think we always set this up in policy where people say, I realize that this is a bad solution, but point me to a better solution. And there's always a third choice, which is maybe instead of implementing a bad policy for want of anything else, we let it play out and we do the best we can and we don't make the situation worse. And we're sitting in a situation right now. I don't know if this will make it worse or not, but I have a hard time going back on some of this stuff. The social contract that if you're using somebody else's goods and services, you got to pay them for it. I have a hard time setting aside that social contract.
And, you know, what I would say is in a time of crisis, our organization is always going to choose people over business. And that is, you know, a decision.
Which is a nice thing to say until you realize that businesses are people too. Rental companies employ people. Rental companies pay taxes. You know, they're businesses too. They're people too.
I agree, and they also deserve help. It's not a zero-sum game here. We're just trying to help folks before tomorrow, and then if we can get that solved, we'd love to pivot and begin to help the next people who need the help the most.
Well, Dane, I thank you for coming on. I know this is a tough conversation to have. We don't agree on it, but I appreciate you coming on, and I'm glad we're having the conversation because nobody has a monopoly on the best ideas in a situation like this, or any situation, frankly. I thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Rob. We've kind of had easier conversations so far. I can't tell you I was necessarily looking forward to having a less agreeable conversation, but I appreciate being able to speak freely and honestly with each other, and I think it's good for everybody in North Dakota.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.